entrenched in a career. I was 38 years old. We had 4 children. So it was a perfect time. But our image of what ministry would be like was that we would serve some small country churches, you know, with the white picket fence around the parsonage, and you know, work with congregations in the small cities of Ohio where we were located at that time. But you know, God had a little different path in mind for us. At that point in our lives, we thought serving others for us meant, you know, maybe I'd visit those who were sick, or, you know, others in the community. So I thought about this about 2 years ago, when Patty and I, who have become very involved with a jail ministry program over the last 10, 12 years. And we were inside the jail for a weekend, and one of my friends came running over to me and said, "Dan, you have got to see this." You know, that's the kind of invitation that you just don't run away from. So I followed my friend. I was working with the women's group that weekend, and Patty was working with the men's group. And I go over to this area where Patty and the men are located, and there's my wife, who is a music and worship leader, surrounded by at least 35 very large men in orange jumpsuits, teaching them the words and the motions to Pharaoh. And I remember that moment thinking, you know, God really has taken us on a little different path here than we thought, all the way to Florida. That jail ministry took me into a situation about 6 months ago, where I had been leading a weekend retreat in the jail. And there was a young man in the retreat, as always seems to happen. We get connected with 1 or 2 particular people on a weekend. His name was Chris, and I sat and talked with him quite a while one evening. He still had a huge hematoma on the back of his head, a place of swelling. And he finally let me know his story, that he and his wife had been separated for almost 9 years. He had complete custody and care of their 4 children. Seemed like just a really good guy that, you know, maybe had done something wrong, and he had. As he admitted, he said, "I took my oldest son, who was 14 at the time, I'd taken him fishing." He said, "I'd had a few too many beers, and my wife's live-in boyfriend stopped by where we were fishing." He said, "Something about him entering into this moment with me and my son just triggered something in me." He said, and so we started getting physical with one another, pushing each other back and forth. He said it started to escalate to a full-blown fight. He said, and my son stepped in between us, and I accidentally hit my son. He said, my wife's boyfriend called the police, and I'm here for a child endangerment. The hematoma was from getting hit in the back of the head with a beer bottle in that scuffle. So I talked to Chris for quite a while about God's redemptive ability, God's forgiving ability. Chris went back amongst the other inmates and prisoners that were gathered there and talked for a while. Saturday afternoon, Chris came up to me. He said, "Pastor Dan, I'd like to be baptized." Now, I asked him the usual questions, Brian, like, have you been baptized before? He said, no. I said, well, Chris, what we usually do with people in the jail if they want to be baptized is once you get out of here, we connect you with the local community so that they can surround you with their love and grace. He said, Pastor Dan, I want to be baptized here. I said, okay, Chris, tell me why. He said, I want to be baptized here here is where I found Jesus Christ. Those of you that have studied Latin know that the name Chris means Christ bearer, Christopher. Chris was a Christ bearer to me. But as I reflected on this passage from John, Chris also was a reminder to me of two things. That if we want to get unbound from the stuff that binds us and holds us, we need the presence of Jesus Christ, and we need a community surrounding us and loving us. This story has so many parts to it. I think you could go through this story and pick one verse at a time and spend a year in it if you want. But a few particulars have always struck me about this passage. One is Martha's reaction. Lord, have you been here? You ever notice how in times of distress or when difficult things have happened to us, we have this tendency to blame Jesus or blame God? If you'd only been here, this wouldn't have happened. Rather than trusting that God will walk with us every step of the way. Knowing that Jesus is present with us in the high moments and the low and challenging moments of life. But I've always appreciated what Jesus does next with her. He makes the declaration of who he is, but he doesn't let her off the hook. Can you imagine what that moment must have been like? Jesus looking her right in the eye and saying, "Do you believe this?" Sometimes we have this image of the gentle Jesus, the gentle shepherd. This isn't one of those moments. This is a moment where he kind of puts it to her and says, "Do you believe this?" It's a reminder to us that we are challenged every day to show that we believe that Jesus is the Lord. I love the moment when Jesus weeps, partly because it was, in my Sunday school days, the easiest passage in the Bible to memorize. But it reminds us that we can never ever say that Jesus does not understand our pain, because he lived every human emotion. We can't ever say, well, God doesn't understand what I'm going through, because through Jesus Christ, he understands everything that we go through. And the emotions are so true here. Well, take away the stone. Well, Lord, I'm like you, I appreciate that he stinketh, We can't roll the stone away, he's going to smell. Isn't that us? Jesus says, here's what, I'm going to do something great here. Yeah, but God, And they roll it away. Lazarus emerges, and the community responds to Jesus' command, and they unbind him. All of us have stuff, don't we? Don't we all have stuff we carry around? All of us are in prisons of sorts, like my friend Chris. And it's that stuff that makes all of us bound up. And we need Jesus, and we need a community around us to unbound us. I spent the last 2 days with many of your leaders, with Brian. I know from the sense I got in the room the last 2 days, but I just want to add, I hope you appreciate what kind of a leader you've got in this man and his family. I see a lot of churches in my work, and and I can sense when there's joy and genuine care for one another. And I found that here. But even as loving as you are, even as much as you want to be loving and caring to others, there are still levels of pain and injury within each of us that we don't know about each other. It comes from things that maybe we've done that we know we shouldn't have, and we keep that stuffed and buried. Or maybe it was something that was done to you that you did not deserve. No matter what your stuff is, no matter what that stuff is that has bound you, I can assure you that God, through Jesus Christ, already knows about all your stuff and stands ready to forgive you and to heal you and to move forward in your life. It's that deeply stuffed pain that we carry around that keeps us bound rather than being the fully authentic people that God created us to be. Now, knowing that that's true for us in the faith community, think how much worse that must be for people who are not in the faith community. The people that don't have the hope of Jesus Christ, who also have their own stuff buried deep within them. Brian mentioned that I'm the director of New Church Development for the annual conference. That means that my job, my primary focus, is looking at the state of Florida and saying, where do we not have churches in areas where people need what we have to offer in Jesus Christ? So a large part of that is studying the demographics of different areas. In your situation right here, within a 10-minute drive of this place where we are right now, there are almost 55,000 people. 57% of them have no church affiliation. Now that's even being generous enough to throw in those that only show up on Christmas Eve and on Easter Sunday. 57% of those 55,000. So that's about 32,000 people within 10 minutes of where we are right now that have no relationship with the faith community. Now, why do they not come? What do they say about us? Well, this doesn't seem to change from place to place around the entire country. The opinions are that we are too judgmental, we're too focused on money, you can't trust Christians and Christian leaders, and we've experienced conflict in the Christian community. We have what they need, but we have to acknowledge what we as the faith community have done as the body of Christ to create their distrust and work to overcome that in the future. See, when you live a life fully surrendered to Jesus, you know there's a joy and a peace that persons outside the faith can't understand. And because they can't understand, they usually respond by calling us names, right? My favorite one is when they call me a hypocrite. Or they say things like, the church is just filled with hypocrites. I mean, I usually am just waiting for that one. Because I can say, you are absolutely right. And I take my place as the worst of the hypocrites. So I want you to think about just how bad I would be if I didn't have Jesus in my life. I'm a better husband because Jesus Christ is in my life. I'm a better father because Jesus Christ is in my life. I'm a better grandfather of the 6 most adorable grandchildren anywhere because Jesus is in my life. I'm a better pastor because Jesus is in my life. I'm simply a better person because Jesus Christ is in my life. have Jesus Christ in my life because loving communities have unbound me, and Jesus Christ has called me from death to life. Because of that, I can live a life filled with more joy and more passion and more peace than I ever could have imagined. So how can we as a community be the people who help others get unbound? Well, as Bishop Graham Cray, a recently retired Anglican bishop that we met in England a year and a half ago, told us, an Anglican bishop telling us, remember who you are as United Methodists. I thought that was interesting advice. So I began to think about what is unique about the Methodist movement. Now, I'm a birthright Quaker. I was raised in the Quaker tradition, became a Methodist later in life. But there are several things that are unique contributions that Methodists have to the faith landscape. One is this idea of a methodical spiritual life, a life that revolves around prayer and disciplined reading of Scripture and study of Scripture in community and worship, and service to others. I think about this when I remember a member of the first church I served, a little country church. There's a special place in heaven reserved for those people who are members of churches served by student pastors because they got everything experimented on them through the years. But John was the husband of our church organist, and he swore he would never come to church. And through some conflict and negotiation in the family, he said, all right, I'll come to church and hear you warm up each Sunday morning, and then I'll leave because I don't want any of that church stuff. This was a sanctuary about a third the size of this one. It had an overflow area to one side where I led a Sunday morning to night adult Bible study. John, on his first Sunday coming to hear Jenny warm up, sat in the farthest seat to this side away from us that he could get. Sat there for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then I noticed he moved to the middle of that section. More weeks went by, I noticed that he came to the middle, but still had not crossed the Red Sea. Then came the Sunday that he actually moved over. And I'd catch him turning and looking and listening, and when I'd catch his eye, his head would snap back around. He kept moving and kept moving and kept moving until a Sunday after about 3 months of this, he actually joined the class. 2 years later, when I left that church, John was the superintendent of Sunday school, led an adult Sunday school class, and another year later left his job to become the executive director of Habitat for Humanity in Delaware, Ohio. That's how God works in a disciplined spiritual life. The other thing that's unique to Methodism is the idea of itineracy. Now, usually when we hear that word in the United Methodist Church, we think, well, pastors in the church like Brian and I are itinerant. We go where the bishop sends us. That's not how John Wesley meant it. Wesley meant that we are all itinerant. The world is our parish. It means wherever you are located, wherever God plants you, you're to be in faithful mission and service for God through Jesus Christ. So all of us, no matter where you have come from, if you're here, this is your new mission field. This is your new parish. The other unique contribution is our understanding of grace. That we believe that God's grace works within us to perfect us over our life. And I think about this when I think of my best friend, who is a very conservative Southern Baptist preacher. Gary and I became good friends 12 years ago and have that has grown into being best friends. He is as conservative as I am liberal. We have joked that on election days every year, we should just go out and have a beer together because we know we're going to cancel out each other's votes. There is not an issue, it seems like, that we agree on except one. That is that Jesus Christ is the hope of the world. And that holds us together in friendship. Now think about what that could mean in the church world, in our nation, and in our world. If we could have the grace of God working within us in such a way that even those people with whom